Welcome to this evening session, which is on culture wars beyond the borders. And for this session, I'm joined by very esteemed scholars. I have next to me Professor of Security Studies, Christine Fair from Georgetown, Washington University, excuse me.
Those are fighting words.
Yeah. I have, excuse me. I have Ali Raza, a distinguished professor.
Let me make another correction.
Ali, yeah, sorry. Auto-correction can, sometimes really put you in trouble.
He's number 5 dangerous man in Bangladesh.
Wow, I didn't know that. A distinguished professor from Illinois State University, USA. And then we have Gregory Simon, Associate Professor, Department of Communication Science, Turiba University. And myself, Irfan, the founder and managing director of Afghanistan Security Institute. And I also work as a full-time with the World Food Program. I welcome you all to this session. Can we have a big round of applause just to encourage our speakers? Thank you very much. I'm sure you might have heard all about culture war. We talk about conventional war, cyber warfare, but more or less, most of us may know what is a culture war. From my very shallow understanding, a culture war commonly refers to topics on which there is general disagreement. It can be social values, social belief system, which can include attitudes toward religion, abortion, for example, homosexuality, multiculturalism, feminism, popular culture, and even what has been taught in the school. So everything more or less can be, put into this debate. I will just come straight to the panelists because they are the expert on this topic, and then they will provide more information on this topic. So I'm starting with Professor Simon. Could you please tell us and our audience here what exactly is culture war and why this is important to discuss here? Thank you.
So, that was a good overview to tease out some different talking points. So, if we're looking at culture war, it's touching upon culture itself, which is something very specific. It's something very emotional, and it's something which is contested. So, if we look at these things, culture and identity, that these are coming together, sometimes harmoniously, other times not. And we're looking at, if you look at the belief system, there are 3 broad levels of belief. The least held ones, which chop and change, opinions. And then we can move up to attitudes, which are a bit more solidified, and the most solid part of a person are values. And so we're looking at the values, and maybe sometimes attitudes come into it more rather than the other ones. And so this is looking at culture. And of course, when one defines themselves in a certain way, this is not only about group cohesion, but it's also signalling to outside groups what you stand for, who you are, these kinds of things. So it's for internal cohesion, but for projecting externally what you represent, who you are. And this can get problematic when you're getting different cultures, although sometimes it's not always straightforward either. It depends on the level, I would say, the things that sort of determine whether something comes to whether you can have harmony or conflict. It depends on this ideological component, but also this more pragmatic component as a counterweight. So, for example, I was organising a conference on the image of Islam in Russia, and had a diverse group of people around, which included liberals, they included Muslims, they included hardcore Orthodox believers. And one soon saw that this idea of culture is not so straightforward. One would assume that one would have a greater affinity with fellow countrymen or these other things. But what I found was that the more liberally minded, it didn't matter which country they came from, had an actual draw to each other. And those believers, it didn't matter if they were Orthodox or Muslim, had that affinity to each other. And so this idea of culture is not always to be assumed or presumed. But it is important to understand this identity and this projection. How, if we look at how this operates, when this, one can also have multiple identities. For example, I'm from New Zealand. I live in Sweden. And more specifically, I was from a New Zealand farm, and I'm in a Swedish university town. So one can say there's a little bit of cultural, how do you call it, clash of civilizations, I think was the term for this. Although theoretically, at the bigger level, both liberal democracies. But you have these differences. And I mean, we can look at what is happening, which is tearing things apart at the moment, especially in this Western civilization, if we want to call it that, between the culturally and socially conservative versus the culturally and socially leftist, progressive, different terms for it. But one can see that there is quite a bit of bitterness in this, and this is the contestation, where it's a zero-sum game. One side's not prepared to give ground to the other. So I would say that it's not going very good places, but one can also see the problems with this culture war, because if we're looking at strictly this idea of this other conflict at the moment, the global north versus the global south, one can see the different nuances in here, because if we look at what is happening even in the EU, for example, the European Union, you have a divide between old so-called EU member states and new EU member states. And this is, a great deal of this is owing to culture. I mean, the one thing they all agree on are the geopolitical angles. But when it comes to culture, this is where you have the differences. Because if we look at this elite of the leading European Union countries, these are falling into this more liberal category, this global liberalism, or however you wish to define that particular group. And that, of course, is causing problems with those from Eastern European countries who are socially and culturally more conservative, where religion, traditional families, at these different points are still very sacred cows which are not to be sacrificed. And if we look at it, this is probably going to be one of the things which is going to cause much more problems in the future. And we can see a number of these things boiling up now, because we have those so-called problem countries as far as the European Union is concerned, Poland, Hungary, and, well, we can add Slovakia soon enough, Romania. But you've got this this issue here. So this is at the one level, the supra level, and this cultural war. As a contestation, and this does not necessarily mean something which is how do you call it? Kinetic war. That is the use of military force. One can have a non-kinetic war, a war that is fought by ideas, it's fought by these other different intangible elements. So, and this is fought more in the informational and the cognitive space. And this differs from, not to say that a culture war can actually turn into an actual physical war, but this process that leads up to it. And looking at currently, you have these other different cultural aspects which are leading to increased conflict. If we look now, for example, the US, which is trying to gain international, how would you call it, conformism on Ukraine issue. That is one problem, because this is going into the ideological component, and here you've got two different approaches which will not end well if one side keeps on pushing the other, and that is that you have this Western-centric order which has become quite messianic, that it's spreading this idea of Western liberalism, the values of that, to other parts of the world. And of course, when we get into this part of the world, the global south, this starts to evoke some historical memory of other civilizing missions of other countries, which, if we look at how these are portrayed, whether it be Pax Britannica, peace, British peace, one needs to ask, peace for whom? Because, if we look here, not far from here, or even here, this Bengal region in 1943, if you ask people in Europe, what about this? How has that got to do with Pax Britannica? What about these values which Borrell is expressing now, the garden versus the jungle? And although he did better that, I give him, he managed one better when he told a Latin American audience that Latin America and Europe should build a new world just like the conquistadors. So he is capable of better. But I'll just start to wrap up here. It's a very complex thing, and it's also a very emotional thing. And when we're looking at this Western attempt to in this very messianic ideological way to proselytize the rest of the world, this end of history idea, it's meeting another particular viewpoint. You've got different viewpoints, but the approach is rather different, because you have a much more pragmatic approach, one which is based on national interest and of each of those countries. We can see how this is working currently with the US trying to pressure India in terms of reforming its stance on Ukraine. That can be said as a culture war. And one can also talk about in the US this construct of the flyover zone, this deplorables versus how do they, the deplorables and the snowflakes, I think was the,
Republicans are, make no mistake, big snowflakes.
yeah.
Let's be really clear. If you call them a fascist, they melt.
Yep, but this is all part of the culture war. It's about defining and being defined. And I will...
I think we're all snowflakes.
Thank you very much. I'm sure the audience must have a lot of questions, but we will have a Q&A session later on. And I must say, really enjoy the silence. It's a lot, and sometimes even I got intimidated because it was too much silence. And I really would love if you can continue this in our next 2 sessions, tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. So I really appreciate the attention. Thanks again, Professor Simon. Professor Ali Riaz, if I use the terminology very loosely, and if we can divide the culture war in progressive and orthodox viewpoint, and we will see and observe that in most societies there is a powerful movement or institution, and in some countries those institutions are very powerful, and they are the one defining and imposing, let's say, intellectual culture, compulsory religious practices, heterosexuality, the way they want things are being imposed in those societies. On the other hand, we have progressive viewpoint, which does not really believe in the status quo. They want to challenge that, and they want to bring reforms into society. And the critique would argue that leftists, or let's say those who are advocating for progressive views, are changing the tradition which are essential to societies. For some societies, maybe religion is the most important thing. And maybe it's a little bit extreme, but they would also critique that leftists are progressive, they are eradicating families, institution too. So this, 2 conflicting debates are going on. We feel it, and it has been affecting the global politics as well. And what I would love to know from you, and maybe the audience would also like to know, that which of these competing, debate is rising on the global level. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Irfan. After Professor Simon's introduction as to what culture war means, I will take a different route, rather. It's a route that is less traveled, let me put it this way. First of all, coming from the United States, where I live, and incessantly hearing this culture war, thanks to Fox Television and others, so to speak, it seems to me there is a frame to understand it, but I would like to question that frame. This whole notion of the culture war, the way, and particularly today in the conversation, when we are talking about the culture war, Professor Simon has mentioned the ideational part of it, that ideology is one, but definitely it is an affective thing. Basically, it becomes emotive things at one point or another. But before that, when we are talking of culture wars, there seems to be one thing, particularly when today, the notion of universalizing. As Irfan has pointed out, that often we frame it is as if versus conservative versus progressive, orthodox versus liberal. This binary frame of understanding the culture seems to obliterate the gray area, completely obliterate the gray area. And I would love to be in that gray area. I do not want to be in one of the boxes that has been created for me by someone else. Particularly, the reason is this, that the whole question of culture war stems from identity politics. I'm not trying to undermine the importance of identity politics. I do understand the role of the gender and ethnicity, and being a minority in the United States, despite the fact that it is a rainbow nation, though it is called melting pot, which I don't agree with. I think it is a rainbow nation. And being a minority, my identity matters. I do understand that. I do understand the gender matters. I do understand, there are other elements. Your faith matters, your sexual orientation matters. Hence, this identity politics has an importance to me. I'm not undermining that. But when this identity politics has become instrumentalizing into a binary and universalized, particularly when we are talking in the Indo-Pacific context, the problem lies is, first of all, this entire binarization obliterates the gray area. And this is, in my understanding, that it is practically a trap created for you to walk into and frame yourself in understanding, frame yourself in talking about, as if there is an irreconcilable difference between you and I. There isn't. There are areas that we can work together. So those who are instrumentalizing this culture wars has a reason to do it, and I think that is the politics of it. And perhaps given that my own background is in political science and my proclivity to see everything through this prism of politics, I am overemphasizing the politics part of it. But definitely, what I see is this, that the whole question of culture war emerges from a very pernicious polarization and a deliberate pernicious polarization that will definitely benefit a certain group of individuals or a certain group in doing so. Christine has been mentioning with respect to the United States, the Republican and the Democrat, and as I see, and please bear with me, if you disagree, please you can come back later. The entire effort of the Republican Party in the context of the United States over the last decade, and perhaps more than that, they're succeeding better now in the last 10 years, is simply putting me as a minority to one single identity. Whether I am an American, that's not the point. The point to them is I'm an immigrant. That my skin color seems to be brown. As if that should be my identity. Is it my identity? Of course this is my identity, because I do belong to multiple identities. And when this entire culture war thing is framed, discussed, debated, and pointed out, it is repeatedly been told in some form or other that I have to belong to a certain group. That I got to be something, exclusively something, whether that is my gender, whether it is my sexual orientation, or that could be plain and simple my skin color. That is where I have problem in discussing this, as if it is devoid of that kind of, devoid of making this as if it is the only thing. This is how I should be seeing ourselves and others. And when I start to see others through this frame, when I start to see someone with this other frame, that the problem is this, at least that is how I see. First of all, the war analogy itself is problematic to me. Because what you do in war, you annihilate your enemy. There is no other thing that you can do in war, can you? Because your existence depends on the annihilation of the other. You construct the other as enemy, put them, that group, particular group, into one box, erase the gray area, then we see ourselves either black or white, and then if I am black, in some ways, erasing the white is basically my existence lives on this. This creating this existential threat, which is a contrived one. It is absolutely contrived one. That is the problematic part. So, am I saying that there is no culture war or that the cultural differences are completely contrived? No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that framing it as war itself is problematic. Universalizing it is problematic, particularly when we are defining it progressive versus liberal. Let me take the case of others. In the United States, we see it as if those who are the flag-waving Republicans are trying to tell me that I'm less patriotic than them. That is problematic. Patriotism has become a weapon. Weaponization of patriotism, and you can see that one in uber nationalism, not in Germany in 1930, but in 21st century in the United States as well as in Bangladesh. That your patriotism can be questioned if you do not agree to this hegemonic idea that has been produced by state. In society, there are contesting ideas, and that is the natural thing to do. But when state becomes part of it, in creating an hegemonic idea and impose on us, whether I am in the United States, you are in Germany in 1930s, I don't know what is the situation today, but nevertheless, in case of Bangladesh at this point, that is where I see the culture. If you call it cultural conflict or cultural, contestation, that is where it is. But I'm seriously and sincerely uncomfortable in using this war analogy, this militaristic approach to it, annihilation approach to it, that, and making it so effective in the sense of the emotive one, then you don't see anything else. Then you don't actually consider other. This is the consequence. There are two consequences, or two things that creates this kind of consequence. One is that, a predatory identity, a very predatory identity, whether it is the nationalism. It could well be a nationalism. So when there is a nationalism, a certain interpretation of nationalism, if I question it, am I engaged in a culture war? Should I be actually think that, okay, it is, this is a culture war going on? That is how those who are actually promoting a very defined, and in some cases very dubiously defined, and in some cases it is so flexible, whatever they want to do, or however they want to explain it, they can extrapolate, squeeze as it fits to them. Nationalism is defined as such in some places. If I question it, am I engaged in war? No, I'm not engaged in war. I'm just questioning that. And I have a right. I have a right to question. Because I am the sovereign. As a sovereign, if I have given some power to someone else, as the state, as we call it, I've given it with terms and conditions. That I've not given it all together. This is inalienable right that I have. I've given it for a certain moment to certain individuals for managing it for a certain time. Then I can question them, I count them. So all these things, the way I see it, there's this creation of binary, creating this trap that I have to think it in that way. And as if culture war has to be progressive versus liberal, orthodox. No, it's not. Multiplicity of identity should allow me to insist on various things. Say, for example, yes, as a US citizen with the Bangladeshi ethnicity, with by faith Muslim, and not so practicing, unfortunately, can I not question the Americans, the policies that, yes, I don't have to wave the flag at my doorstep? Does that make it less patriotic about United States? or by questioning the Bangladesh authority, does it make it less of a Bangladeshi origin, Bangladeshi ethnicity with respect to my identity? It doesn't. Yes, I'm a male. You know, and I'm not going to talk about my sexual orientation. Wait, you know, if you are waiting for the next thing, so please forget about that. You know, but that is the point. So my position with respect to this, and sorry for taking longer than Irfan, you know, longer than
We have time.
we have time. So okay, that gives me enough. You know. So my point is with respect to this conversation that we need to ask that question. We need not to accept what is considered a conventional wisdom, which has been, you know, for certain ways it has been propagated, constructed, and completely each and every time it is reproduced. In the context of the United States, I'm talking about the United States because I live there. I try to be part of the understanding the politics and deeply concerned where the U.S. politics is going on. You know, some of my friends would not, but that doesn't matter. It makes me extremely worried as to where the United States is heading in terms of its politics. You know. Having said that, my point is that, you know, let us question this. Let us raise this thing that, you know, war analogy in any context should be avoided. You know, should be avoided. You know, it gives a urgency. It gives a very fascinating things. Yes, you know, and then it creates jingoism. It you can have either flag waving or muscle thumping people. Yes, yes, yes. You know, because it is a war, I'm going to win it. Please let us avoid it. War doesn't help. If the answer is war, then we are asking the wrong question. Let us ask the right question. How the diversity, how the multiplicity is, how the gray area is. How can we reconcile, accommodate, see? How do you do it? I have a very simple answer to this. That is, having a pluralist society where religion, you question, Irfan, the religion question. The religion question, state should not get into the religion question. How do you make it? If those who are suggesting that Sharia should be the law, or Sharia should be practiced, as a matter of fact, what we describe as secular state is more, you know, conducive to practice if the moral underpinnings of Sharia is there. If you think moral underpinnings of Sharia is there. In similar fashions, that the plurality, the pluralism that would allow you, that is what I consider as a democracy. What is democracy? Is it majoritarianism? To me, democracy means that it would protect the minority. I'm not talking in terms of the religious minority. I'm not talking about the ethnic minority. Ideological. Everyone should be protected. That is what democracy is all about. Democracy is not majoritarian rule. So, if there is a pluralist society where you can have faith and you can also be allowed to have not having any faith. Be an atheist, so be it. Let the state protect you because you are an atheist. That is your faith. I believe that I don't believe in something. So what? In terms of ideology, if I can be in that position that I don't believe in any ideology, why shouldn't I be in a situation that I don't believe in a religion? Or for that matter, you know, all things that can be accommodated within this broader notion of pluralist society. And there, everyone would be on, if you draw a spectrum, there should be one on the left, on the right, so be it. But some people like me, who happens to be in the middle, There will be some people like me who actually really truly hates, and I consciously use the word hate. I don't like the word hate. I hate to be boxed. You know why? Because boxes are suffocating. Try yourself, put in a box and shut the box, and you'll see it is very suffocating. Very, very suffocating. Ideological boxes is nothing different than that. It is very suffocating. And that's why my point, the central and the final point is that let us not talk about war. Let us talk about diversity, pluralism, and allowing everyone to speak and be part of the society that actually cherish that diversity. I'm not a single identity, neither are you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Riaz, for further elaborating the concept of culture war. And I think it's very unfortunate that no matter how much you are qualified for attaining certain documents, let's say, or whatever, you will still be treated as a second class, or at least not fully conform to that social group or identity. And very unfortunately, politicians have left no stone unturned, to use or politicize, be it religion, be it race or whatever, and even the way you look. And it reminds me of the time when I used to live in India, even though I am from Afghanistan, but as a student, I could hardly afford, my daily things. But when I used to go outside, they would, the shopkeepers or whoever, they would tell me white people price, and then I have to tell them, dude, I may look white, but I'm from Afghanistan. And they wouldn't believe, but then I have to argue with them. So sometimes, it can be played both ways everywhere. Thanks again. I'm coming to my final panelist here, Professor Christine Fair. Personally, I believe that the lack of understanding and the lack of knowledge or lack of, let's say, intolerance toward different beliefs and culture can sometimes, put us or bring huge catastrophes. And I'm giving you some example. For example, when the United States dislodged the Taliban regime in early 2000, there was a huge lack of knowledge from Afghanistan. And that had worsened the 20 years of war in Afghanistan. So this is just one example. In maybe in a more, let's say, dumb perspective, in the Middle East, the masculinity concept is very, clearly, and people take pride on them. And when Saddam was asked, do you have weapons of mass destruction, and even though there is research, he did not have that, but he was like, dude, I have it, And guess what happened? It led to a lot of, destruction in the Middle East. Is there something uncomfortable, Christine?
No.
Okay, thanks.
I've been up since 4 a.m.
Well, yeah, I know the feeling. I'm in your shoes, but I'll make it shorter. So my question is how this lack of understanding and the intolerance toward different culture can influence security. The floor is yours.
Well, I'm not going to talk about that at all because I don't accept the premise of the alleged question. So I really agree with everything that Ali Riaz has said, but I got to be honest with you, I actually find this term culture war to be demeaning and offensive. Because in the context of the United States, this is not a culture war. We have one political party that has been captured by extremists who reject the foundations of our Constitution. Now, I would also argue that's because they are not capable of reading the Constitution with comprehension. And that's not a joke, right? If you actually try to read our Constitution and you look at the American literacy, which is about a 6th grade reading level, the people who are tearing apart our Constitution in the name of protecting our Constitution can't actually read the damn thing. So we have one political party, and I'm going to back this up with data because I'm an empiricist, but this whole culture war thing, you're asking me, am I upset? I find the whole thing tedious and offensive. We have one party that, irrespective of what box you're put in, they want to deprive you of your civil liberties, which our Constitution enshrines. And for the past many decades, we have been trying to expand upon civil liberties to make the promise of America more realized than not. And we have one party. So the thing I hate about culture wars is it brings us bullshit of both sides. Right? I am sorry, but both sides are not equivalent. One side wants to take away my decisions about what I do with my womb. One side wants to decide that he is not an equal citizen based upon a variety of categories. One side says that we're pro-life while they support every goddamn thing with a gun. Right? This is not a culture war. This is a war about what we are and what our institutions mean. Okay, so the culture war makes it sound as if, we're all mamby-pamby, we're just arguing over who gets to use what bathroom. No, we are actually arguing over whether I am an equal citizen to a white Christian male, whether Ali is equal to a white Christian male. And this is not a cultural war, people. This is a war over law. This is a war over legal interpretation. This is a retrenchment from the promise of what our Constitution has. By the way, I'm also tired of hearing about our founding fathers. It took 19 amendments for me to get the right to vote. So clearly, the founding fathers had some problems. And even as Thomas Jefferson wrote, all men are created equal, he was enslaving human beings, raping the people he enslaved, and he was selling those enslaved persons like chattel. So I don't want you to get the illusion that I hold our founding fathers in any sort of prestige. I do not, right? But let me talk about data, because primarily, you just got me pissed off with all this culture war bullshit. But let me talk about data, because I'm an empiricist and I'm a proud positivist. So when we started understanding why people were voting for Trump, many of my colleagues were like, oh, it's economic anxiety. Well, you know what? I'm from a rural part of Indiana, and I told those elite West Coast, East Coast people, it is not economic anxiety. And if you ever left your sinecures of the coast, you would understand this. These people are afraid that white people, in particular, are not going to be running the show. They are afraid that white people will actually have to stand in line and wait their turn behind everyone else like a civilized person, right? This is really what's going on. And people went, no, I think we have to engage their economic sensitivities. I think we have enough evidence to show that this is not economic sensitivity. This is about white Christian nationalism. How do I know this? There have been numerous data studies that have asked people a number of simple questions. Who did you vote for in the last election? Right? Then we were asked a series of questions about how much do you support the principles of democracy. Also, they were asked economic questions and their beliefs about the economy. And here's what the data actually showed. Those who supported the Republican candidate of Donald Trump were less likely to support democracy than those who voted for Hillary Clinton. Why is this important? Because this very basic statistical finding undergirds what so many of us have felt. Because if you actually look at the power distribution in the United States, Republicans have captured significant institutions, notably the court. And in those states that are held by Republicans, they have gerrymandered into irrelevance brown, black, and poor people, right? And they have used voter registration restrictions to make it harder for black, brown, and poor people to vote. And if that isn't offensive enough, and I suggest to you it is, they even limit where polling stations are to make it even more difficult. On top of that, our voting day is not a public holiday. It's on a goddamn Tuesday. So if you look at where poor people, who also often, but not always, happen to be black and brown, how many hours it takes for them to vote, those are hours that they aren't working. So the entire system is designed to privilege a certain sector of the electorate. That's one side. And the other side says, no, this is bullshit. Everyone should be allowed to vote. You shouldn't be allowed to gerrymander black, brown, and poor people out of existence. So this is not a culture war, people. This is a war over law. This is a war over enfranchisement. This is a war over one person, one vote, because in many places, it is a war over one person, no vote. So calling this a culture war offends me to my core. So the data are really clear. Why do Republicans support less democracy? It's because they can't win a fair fight. This is also very clear when you look at their behavior. So it's very nice when quantitative data, based upon large surveys of American voting behavior, happen to align with observed behavior. But here's a funny thing. So several years ago, Dr. Riaz and I, we did a survey here in Bangladesh. And I generally do survey work. I like survey work. I like crunching data. I feel comfortable speaking to data. So there's this large debate in the scholarly literature about Islam and democracy, right? It kind of goes back to Samuel Huntington's nonsense that, Muslims and democracy can't coexist, blah-de-blah-de-blah. So when we did this survey, thanks to Ali Riaz, we had a democracy battery, which is basic support for your rights, freedom of speech, right to assemble, property rights. And this is basically taken from the Freedom Index, right? We also created indices for secularism, which is the distance, keeping religion out of the state, or in the case of Bangladesh, equidistance to all faiths. And we also had an index for support for political Islam or Sharia. So we did the number crunching. A couple of fascinating findings left out. Do you know who supported democracy the most? Who thinks the secularists supported democracy? Anyone? Anyone signing up the secularist-hearted democracy? Anyone? Anyone? Come on, don't be chickens. Hell no. Do you know who liked the democracy the most? Islamists. Do you know why? It's the same reason why the Republicans don't want true democracy. Because the secularists don't want a fair fight. Because if there was a fair fight, the Islamists might come back to power. The Islamists, much like the American Democrats, so ironic, want more democracy, because if there were a fair fight, they would actually do fairly well at the polls. So whoever thought that Bangladesh's Islamists would want more democracy? But it turns out the mechanism is the same. When you are being deprived your right to vote, it doesn't matter whether you are an Islamist or whether you're an American Democrat, you want access to more democracy. So this isn't about culture. This is about law. This is about who gets to exercise their rights and who doesn't. And calling this a cultural war, quite frankly, it makes me want to drink. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Thank you.
To all the democracy lovers in the room, cheers. And it doesn't have to be non-halal. It can be a halal beverage too. To all the Islamists who fight for democracy, cheers to you.
Thank you very much for your perspective. But I think whatever you touched upon was like very practical things that we see in our daily lives. I'm not a scholar, but I really have a great respect for good scholars. And whatever you mentioned, I think can be summarized as culture war.
No, bro. Okay, we're gonna solve this. We're gonna solve this by doing a fucking push-up match right there on the floor. Me and you, push-ups, bro. And if you beat me, it's a culture war. If I beat you, which I will, it's not.
Well, maybe I can challenge the whole thing
He
for
thinks
push-up.
I'm
This is
joking.
one thing.
He thinks I'm joking. I am not joking.
And also,
challenge
if
him to
I
this
can,
duel.
yeah, I mean, this is what we have learned from Scholar. Just call it culture war simply. So this is what I learned. But of course, you are Scholar. You know much better than I. Anyways, thank you very much for this very exciting conversation. And I'm really honored to be among you guys. Since it's a very informal, discussion, now we can use words that we want, even though which I don't like. But a good round of applause. Now we are coming to Q&A session, and if you have any question, feel free to ask. And please identify whom would you like to ask this question to. The hard job. So we can start from you, gentlemen.
Hi, good evening. I'm Parvez Karim Abbasi, an economist by profession. Guilty.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah,
I love
indeed.
people who can handle data.
No, again, based on the questions or the discussion that we have just heard, and again, any discussion of Professor Christine Fair, two things will be there. One, enough food for thought and enough profanities to kick you out of your boredom. She has not changed over time. But then again, Mr. Irfan, again, she does this in good spirit, nothing else.
Of course.
Just an observation, and I won't take too much of time. We were talking about the United States, as we rightly should. But if you look into the founding mythos of America, it was found by Puritans, white Christians who could not integrate with the more moderate Church of England. And the way that they took out basically the Amerindian population, or the firstborn population of this is the hallmark of the United States of America. One of the reasons why the US War of Independence was fought was because they did not agree to the British basically taking over French-occupied land, whereby there would not be any slavery introduced. So the founding fathers, I agree with you, were also moved by cupidity. And it's very ironical that the Republican Party, led by honest Abe Lincoln, now that was basically supporting black emancipation at the fag end of the war.
Sorry, let me shamelessly interrupt you. Please come
Yes,
to the question.
yes, thank you. This is more for your understanding. The question is, right now, are the Republicans the upholders of a white Christian value, which they think they are under threat? And is that why they are linking up to the white Republican voters? Do they think that the white Christian values on which the United States of America was founded is under threat? That's the question. Thank you.
I have data on this, right?
Yeah.
So my colleague and I, we've crunched some data because we're interested in this comparative piece. So overwhelmingly, white men voted for Trump, right? So one way of interpreting this is that they were voting for greater access to white privilege or protecting white privilege. About half of the women who cast votes who were white voted for Trump. So we can understand this in two ways. The first way is they want greater access to white privilege. Also, white women, they've always been a problem, right? When white women were arguing, white American women were arguing for the right to vote, they weren't arguing for the rights of black women to vote. When black women mobilized for enfranchisement, it was for all women. So if we have civil liberties, it's because some black woman said, fuck you, and got the job done. That's just a fact. White women didn't get this stuff. It was black women who got it done. So then we look at black men. All right, so about 60% of black men voted for Trump, right? Now, what's going on there? They want access to male privilege, right? Black women were the only one who said, oh, hell no, right? They're the only ones. So Biden won because of black women, right? Because the voting patterns more or less remain the same, right? So going to your point, No, I do want to correct your history. Our first sin was actually slavery, not genocide, because we actually used our slaves to further genocide, right? Well, it wasn't. We actually did use our slaves to expand into the West. So it's not chicken and egg, it was actually history. But the legacy of structural white supremacy perdures in every single one of our institutions, whether you're looking at policing. Policing originated in capturing escaped slaves. If you look at the real estate market, the same house that I own, if it's in a black neighborhood, is already depreciated by 30%. And the families who enslaved people have multiple generations of intergenerational wealth transfer. The families of those who are enslaved have not only that, they have intergenerational debt transfer, right? So when people say that slavery was a long time ago, why do we still care about it? For those of us who argue for social justice, you can't say it doesn't matter when every single one of our institutions is affected by it. We literally had a Supreme Court that says you private colleges, you can't select a class based upon other attributes other than merit. But it did not strike down legacies. And legacies are basically affirmative action for stupid white people who had a relative that went to some college. It has nothing to do with their qualifications or their merit, right? And this is absolutely, right? So when people say racism, we shouldn't be harping about it, I say screw you, because you're a white person. Only a white person could have the temerity to make that claim. So this is not about a culture war. This is about fulfilling the promise of our legal institutions. And if you want to trivialize that as a cultural war, then bro, I don't know. We have to do a push-up match.
Thank you.
May I add?
Please.
Okay. Let me just interject on one issue in phrasing your question. You mentioned values, white Christian values, right?
As in research by the American Puritan Christians.
What exactly is that values in 21st century? Absolutely nothing. Living in the United States for 30 plus years, I can say you, this is simply wrapping up something that doesn't exist. So this is what the American media, unfortunately, including the New York Times, Washington Post, has practically put in your mouth. Then you have swallowed it, digested it, and now telling us back. It's not. There's nothing called white Christian values. Because if you look at Chris mentioned about some of the data, but I'm not going to get into the data at this point, despite the fact that I have some inclination, and I'm very bad in math. So that's one of the other reasons that I don't go into the number game. But most important point here, and this is related to what we are talking today. It's not about the United States. Two things here I would like to make. This is not against you. Please don't take it personally. No, my point is, given that we are so close, I could pick on you. I mean, my point is this, that the notion of these values, as if it is an homogenized thing, itself is problematic. Am I, being a Muslim, should I adhere to certain values that has been told by someone that I should? Or for that matter, as an immigrant, should I actually be adhering to certain values that I am told should be? There's nothing called homogeneous values. And precisely over the last 15, 20 years, what we have seen in case of the United States, thanks to those who actually want to perpetuate a very unequal system. They are the one who is actually manufacturing this. The entire criminal justice system is so lopsided and so institutionally made into anti-black, anti-immigrant, anti-Hispanic, So let us talk about it. And this is not a place to talk about the US system. I'm not going to get into this, and especially having other Americans to present, and not so American present who might have a difference with me, That's why my point with respect to this, why and how that is related to what we are discussing today. Universalizing the culture war frame itself is problematic. In the name of nationalism, it can be done that you can questioning nationalism. To me, again, I'm not trying to impose questioning the nationalism is the first job of a patriot. Question nationalism.
Yes.
Until and unless you can question nationalism and any kind of interpretation to it, your patriotism is rather a suspect.
Yes. Bravo.
And that is what is not happening. That is when I do it in the United States, someone may point, oh, you're just an immigrant, that's why you're questioning. No, I'm equal American, that's why I'm asking that question. Here again, my friends in Bangladesh, here is my call to you. If it is a call, make it a call. Question the nationalism first, because that has become the coin to sell something that is detrimental to the national interest, to your own well-being, and the future of these countries. In the name of nationalism, plundering the future cannot be tolerated, should not be tolerated, whether it is in the United States by the Republican or here. I'm not going to name the name, the rest you know how to translate that one. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bravo. Can I give you a goddamn standing ovation? Because I think you deserve it. Come on.
Thank you. Have a seat.
Stand up. Seriously,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, my name is Aminul Karim, sir. I'm a Bangladeshi, I'm a Bengali, I'm a Muslim, and I come from mango-grown areas of Bangladesh, and I'm brown. I've got 2 points for Professor Ali Riaz. So one is, and also for Christian, one of them. You think the melting pot concept is not working well in America? That's the number one question. And number 2,
Can you please
melting pot concept.
I get it. I did mention that melting pot. I don't subscribe. I will explain.
Yeah. And number 2 is nationalism concept. You said it's not militaristic. But if you think, compare China and Japan, they are always on the war footing on nationalism. Japan, Korea, they are always on the war footing. Pakistan, India is always on the war footing. And because of nationalism, as a student of military science, I feel nuclear weaponization has been done in South Asia because of nationalism. Just your comment, sir. Thank you.
Let me quickly explain, if you allow me. When I say I don't subscribe to this melting pot, because the whole notion of melting pots tell me that I will have to give up my, basic traits and cultural distinctiveness to become something else. What that something else? What is melting pot? You put everything, then something else comes up, right? Why that has to be, and what is that other thing that comes up? In case of the United States, this whole notion of melting pot was, what would come out is assimilation, that it would basically be shaped by the dominant and possibly hegemonic, not necessarily, because they have actually used coercion. So what is that? That is basically a white, dominant culture or white dominant, characteristics that I will have to adjust to it. That is the same thing has happened in case of Europe, and particularly in the United Kingdom, where I have lived for quite a few years, and I have seen it. This is my personal experience. That's why I say the melting pot. I'm not saying whether it is working or not. My understanding is that United States is a rainbow nation, because that is where the Hispanic community is there, that is where the Asian community is there, then all of them constitute what the United States actually means, at least to me. Most of the people might not agree with me, So be it. Thank you. What was the second question with respect to nationalism? I understand. I do recall that. In the name of nationalism.
Yeah.
That is exactly my point. A country which cannot afford to have bathroom for everyone has more than 10 nuclear weapons. Do I have to tell the country's name? No, sorry, it is called India. It is called India. And I have not come to Pakistan yet, And you know what's the situation of Pakistan. In a contestation with this whole notion of this asymmetric, idea that they are going to challenge India, so they have to have nuclear weapons. So in the name of nationalism, just because Japan did it, so I have to think that it is a great thing. Sorry, I cannot go there, because in the name of nationalism, we have seen what happens either at the level of war, but most importantly, it actually rationalizes irrational act. Most of the time, nationalism practically rationalizes irrational act. I know these are hard things to swallow in some time, but please think sometime. What has happened in the name of nationalism? You're a war of, in the context of the United States, yes, the war of independence. In the context of Bangladesh, it's not questioning the war of independence. Distinctiveness and other things. But if you look at the basic draft, the basic document of Bangladesh foundation, what do you see? There are promises. The promises were, those are the things that established Bangladesh. Equality, social justice, right? It is not about nationalism. It is about equality, social justice. Has it been mobilized, Bangladesh, for the war of independence? Of course, it's a mobilization attitude. But accepting it, that this is the only thing, nationalism will drive us, it doesn't. It doesn't do good. It may help you to get the weapons and justify that Pakistan should have all the nuclear weapons that would save them from God knows what, Who is going to take Pakistan away? I don't know. But my point is, don't waste the time, money on that. Rather build a bathroom for a decent, hygienic nation.
So I agree with everything that he says, except the nuclear issue, I don't think is nationalism. So, for those of you who are aware of this concept of the security dilemma, unfortunately, when India correctly views its long-term strategic threat as China, China is a nuclear weapon state. It's a permanent nuclear weapon state. You will recall that China defeated India in 1962, and China continues to make territorial ingresses, on territory that India holds. So, no, whereas the nuclear weapon states, the permanent nuclear weapon states under the NPT, honor their commitment, right, to roll back and eliminate. By the way, that's never going to happen. There's absolutely no resolution to the nuclearization of the subcontinent. And in fact, what we see is a continued evolution of doctrine, right? So India wants to have a cold start doctrine to punish Pakistan for terrorist attacks. Pakistan innovates, right, by introducing tactical nuclear weapons. It's a terrible name. There's no such thing as a tactical nuclear weapon. They're all strategic. So this cannot be attributed to nationalism. But everything else Ali says, I completely agree with. Nothing good comes out of nationalism. And when I see people on Twitter with flags in their profile, I block them preemptively because I know the rubbish they will spew.
Thank you very much. Please.
Okay, now I think it's time for a bit of gasoline to be thrown on this one and to up the thing. I tend to agree with Irfan on culture wars, because if we look at voting, laws, enfranchisement, disenfranchisement, these are not evidence that culture wars don't exist. They are instruments of culture wars, so that one prevails over the other, and to give advantage to one side over the other. And okay, so media exaggerate. Of course, media sells exaggeration. Does it mean culture wars don't exist? No, it does not. And yeah, I mean, on this nationalism, I would not say that nationalism per se, I mean, I agree with the premise, but it's not a rational argument. It is an emotional justification to prime and mobilize people in a binary fashion to ensure that a non-kinetic culture war escalates.
Thank you very much. We can take probably 2 more questions. We have 9 minutes.
Thank you.
This gentleman, and maybe then you last. Can we
I
go ahead with
think I
this?
was in the queue, so
That's a
anyway, it's
difficult
okay since we
decision.
have the time
Please
for
go
all
ahead.
the speakers, all the questions. My question is basically, I would slightly differ from the 2 panelists, Professor Ali and Christine. Cultural law does exist for me, and therefore my question to all the panelists has it actually, it's not the cultural wall, it's basically the nationalism that has replaced by the cultural wall. It's not, it's a new term for the nationalism. And one more thing to Christine, I mean, I would agree with that Islam believes in democratic values. And Islam is also against the concept of nationalism. There is no space for nationalism in Islam. So in that way, Islam is more progressive to many other cultures and religions. Thank
We will
you.
take question and then come to answers. Please. And then last you.
Thank you very much. My name is Asif. So my question is to Christine, because thanks for your very powerful presentation. It was really energizing. However, from an academic point of view, since you have made a very big claim about the Islamists are more democratic than the secularists, and you referred a survey. So my question from that point is this survey published in any referred journal, first of all? Second, since you have implicated these results in a larger population, then of course from the data point of view, we need to look into the samples. So what was the sample size you looked into, and based on that, how you are claiming that it's a general phenomenon? The third and the last question actually is that, so in the context, what do we see, and Professor Riaz also wrote a book on it, where all the good elections that we had, not the problematic elections, but the good elections, the data shows that the Islamists, that if we think, they got the vote less than 10%. It's approximately 4 to 5%. So since we have a larger set of data, how your data can counter that already existing voting-based predictions? That's it.
Can I just take the liberty in aid to question what he said, and then maybe you can answer that too? Personally, I'm also very curious to study the finding that you and Professor Riaz made, and I'm curious to know whether that specific data where Bangladeshi more Muslim-oriented people support democracy more, is that, let's say, generalizable or applicable to other societies? For example, Afghanistan, where people have, and still a big portion of the society has allergy with term democracy. The US did for 2 decades a lot of effort, it sheds its soldier blood, showers billions of dollars, but it couldn't impose democracy there. And this was mainly because people had the leg up understanding what a democracy is. So I'm just curious whether this can be generalized or no.
Are you taking the last question?
And yes, the last question, sir, and then we'll just close the. I'm afraid, sir, you will have to. Just last question.
Thank you very much. I'm Zahid Khan. My current affiliation is American International University, Bangladesh, and also University of Reading, UK. It's good to see my beloved professor in the chair, whom I've known for about 12 years, 13 years now. So I'm really tempted. My discipline is politics and international relations. And I'm really tempted to sort of get the response from the very distinguished panelist of one aspect, taking this debate into a systemic level from a political science and international relations point of view. And let me explain the question here. We see a rise or a claim or reclaim and amplifying the claim of some state being a civilizational state. China has always claimed to be a civilizational state. India is reclaiming and amplifying. And Russia has been in the past. But what we also see in the West is they don't claim it to be a civilizational state, but it's sort of universal civilization, which is underpinned by the narrative of development, consumerism, a little bit of capitalism in most cases. So now, from a systemic level of point of view, and when I'm saying systemic, I'm actually referring to, if you're a realist, world's structural realism, or if you're a constructivist,
Can
I'm
we please
referring
be
to
brief?
that. So
We have 5 minutes.
from that point of view, do you see the rise of this civilizational state does two things? First, does it automatically sort of reinforce nationalism narrative in the domestic, and does it automatically make the international order, future international order, more chaotic as this civilizational state becomes more powerful? Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to very quickly address the data. So I only present the results. Present the results of peer-reviewed data. You can go to my website, christinefair.net, and the particular article is called "The Rational Islamists of Bangladesh." It was published in Politics and Religion, which is the official section of the American Political Science Association. So regarding the data, obviously, we paid attention to that because we're scientists, we're not clowns. The sample size is over 8,000. It's representative at the division level. So yeah, so to your point, this is a scientifically sound sample. I kind of know what I'm doing for a living, but thank you for questioning my credentials. Maybe it's because I'm a lady and you're a dude. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure I have more peer-reviewed publications than you do. I'm just going to put that out there. All right, so going to the important point that was raised, and to the question that you raised, is probably not generalizable, because what's interesting about the Jamaat Islami is that it's the only political party that's truly democratic in this country and in Pakistan, right? The two mainstream parties are dynastic fiefdoms of vertically integrated kleptocratic enterprises. So whether you like it or not, Jamaat Islami is actually a democratic party, right? To your point, that I don't know why you think that the people who have a preference for Islamism are only Jamaatis, because after all, who was their coalition partner? The BNP, which is right of center, right? So to your question, I don't think this finding can be generalized because it has a lot to do with the capture of state institutions by Her Highness and the complete flagrant manner with which she has rigged elections. And so in any arena, if you are a right of center party, if there were free and fair elections, you would fare better than you do in the current situation. So I don't think this is generalizable in any way, shape, or form. It has the most similar, dude, I'm answering your question. So the most similar analogy is with the Republican Party in the United States, right? Because they cannot win a fixed fight. So in the same way that the Awami League and its secularist allies support, bro, I'm really annoyed because I can't think because you're talking so loudly. Please.
I warned you in advance.
Honestly, I will so not tolerate that crap. Really, I won't. So the analogy, which is the closest, is to other parties that prefer autocracy because they can't win a fixed fight. And in the data that I've worked on, the closest parallel is the Republican Party.
Thank you very much. The last questions were not answered.
Yeah, thanks, dude.
Since we don't have any more session, can we please just answer the last question?
Yeah.
Please, thank you very much. That's correct.
Okay.
Thank you, audience.
Nationalism, your point there. Is it a culture? Well, it can be argued that it is, because there are certain values and identities which are put into nationalism, and as Christine says, this cannot be generalised. It's very heterogeneous and depending on a whole bunch of circumstances. So, I mean, if we look at, the rise of Nazi Germany in the 1930s. I mean, that nationalism was absolutely a culture war. You had an other, and you had this very toxic culture which sought to erase the other culture, and by all means.
Can I, Irfan,
Please, yeah.
respond to the last question that Zahid has raised with respect to this civilizational states, right? That's being lately been propagated by China. China has been talking about this for a long time. Lately, India, particularly under Mr. Modi, has been this has been the argument that India is a civilization by itself, civilizational state. Will that transcend the nationalism question or not? I don't think that would. As a matter of fact, this civilizational argument seems to be on the very foundation that I am trying to question here about this cultural argument. The book that has made so much money out of it, Mr. Samuel Huntington, I can assure you, if I had written it, nobody would have published it, because it is completely flawed methodologically. And I've been saying it about it. I mean, had it not been written by Mr. Samuel Huntington, if it had been written by Ali Riaz, I'm sure no publisher would dare publishing it. You know.
But
despite the fact that I have published quite a few books, it's not that this would have been my, and there have been university presses have published as well. I mean, why the point is this? The point of this, with respect to Mr. Huntington's book as well as others, is that framing that as a civilizational issue, it undermines the very basic notion of the evolution of state. Had it been the civilization, then why India is a state? Why China is a state if it is a civilization? Why it is not calling itself empire? Why this? Because the modern state itself, despite all its limitations and everything, modern state itself, its evolution, which is an unending process, but the modern state's evolution itself has some elements to it, and that would remain. So these arguments are just rhetoric in the sense of getting into this conversation, and it's not going to change the international relations in the coming years, possibly not in decades. Beyond that, I won't be here, so who cares?
thank you. And I will just conclude by saying, even though I'm not in a position to say whether the Clash of Civilization was a great work or not, but I'm really curious and keen to know that why so many scholars have cited him. And probably I think that is the most cited book when it comes to culture war. So it's a paradox.
Yeah, it is a paradox. I do ask my students to read it. It doesn't mean that I discount it, but it doesn't make, just because it has been read, it doesn't mean that it is actually correct.
True, I agree. Thank you very much. Please join me in a big round of applause for our exciting. Thank you very much, audience, for your attention.